If I was wrong, it was just a late-night habit, but if I was right, it was the start of a second life. So why did my wife choose 3:47 a.m. to delete messages, and why did my gut already know the one number she was protecting? My name is Nolan Hart, and I learned a long time ago that people never hide what they do. They only hide it from the person who matters most. I did not catch my wife in a hotel lobby, or in a stranger's car, or under neon lights with a guilty laugh, because Lena was not that kind of reckless. Lena was the kind of careful that looks like confidence to outsiders and looks like control to the person living beside it. If you asked her coworkers, they would call her composed. If you asked her friends, they would call her unshakable. If you asked me, I would tell you she was an expert at turning silence into a weapon and then acting surprised when it cut. That night started like 100 other nights we had survived together, with the polite choreography of two adults who share a home and a schedule. The dinner dishes were stacked cleanly, the living room was dim, and the television murmured in the background like a witness who wanted plausible deniability. Lena moved through the house with a towel around her hair, steps light, humming at nothing, because she liked the sound of herself being fine. I sat on the couch with my laptop closed, pretending to read a report I had already memorized, because I understood the value of looking harmless. Somewhere in the hall, the bathroom fan ran, steady and loud, as if it was trying to erase evidence by force. At 3:47 a.m., my eyes opened the way they always did when something in the house changed, and I lay still, listening. The room was dark, but the air had shifted, the tiny pressure difference that happens when someone is awake and pretending they are not. Lena was beside me, but she was not asleep, and the mattress had the faint tension of a body holding itself too carefully. A soft glow pulsed near her pillow, and that glow alone told me more truth than any confession ever would. I did not roll over right away. I did not clear my throat or make a dramatic move. I simply breathed and waited, because the first rule of catching a liar is letting them believe they are safe. Lena's thumbs moved fast, barely making noise, but I could hear the subtle taps if I focused, like tiny drops against a plastic lid. The phone glow brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, the rhythm of a person navigating quickly through a screen they know too well. Then the glow cut out, not gradually like a dimming screen, but suddenly, like a door slamming shut. Lena's body relaxed too quickly after that, like a runner stopping after crossing a line. She set the phone face down, and she exhaled, slow and controlled, the kind of exhale that says the danger passed. That was when I rolled slightly toward her, just enough to signal I was awake without being obvious about how awake. Her breathing changed instantly, adopting the longer pattern of a person performing sleep. I reached for my own phone on the nightstand, not to confront her, not to read her messages, not to do anything illegal or dramatic, but because I had learned that small proof is the only thing that survives big lies. My screen lit the edge of my hand, and as I angled it, I caught a lock screen preview on Lena's phone before it could vanish completely. It was not the full message, not a detailed confession, not the kind of evidence people imagine in movies, but it was enough, because it showed a name fragment and a tone that did not belong to work. It was a line that carried familiarity, irritation, and intimacy all at once, like two people who have already said goodnight more times than they can count. I took a screenshot of what I could see and saved it, then turned my phone screen down and let my face go blank. Lena remained still, breathing carefully, and I could feel the heat of her deception beside me like another body in the bed. I did not touch her. I did not say her name. I did not even swallow too loudly. In that moment, I understood exactly what my options were, and none of them involved yelling. Morning arrived with the same ordinary light, the same stale kitchen smell, and the same rehearsed civility. Lena woke first and moved into the bathroom, turning on the shower with exaggerated normalness, like a person trying to wash away an act. I stayed in bed and listened to the water, because water is a liar's favorite soundtrack. When she came back out, wrapped in steam and confidence, she kissed my cheek the way you kiss a coworker at a company party when someone is watching. I returned the gesture with the same empty politeness, because I had no intention of giving her a fight she could describe later. At breakfast, she checked her phone 3 times while pretending she was not checking it. She placed it screen down, then flipped it casually, then held it under the table in her lap, like a teenager hiding a crush from a parent. Lena was 34, old enough to be embarrassed by this behavior, which meant she was not embarrassed, which meant it mattered. She asked me about my day in a voice that sounded normal, and I answered with the minimum required information because I did not want my own words turning into fuel for her story. While she poured coffee, her phone buzzed once, and I saw the reflex in her fingers, the immediate reach, the tiny panic, and then the quick recovery when she remembered I was in the room. She let the phone sit for a few seconds, as if she was proving she could ignore it, then picked it up and glanced at the screen like a doctor reading a lab result. Her expression tightened for a moment, then smoothed out. She set the phone down and smiled at me, an expression so practiced it could have been a corporate headshot. I wanted to ask her what she was deleting. I wanted to ask her why 3:47 a.m. was the time she chose to betray our bed. But questions asked too early are gifts to liars, because they reveal what you know and what you do not. Lena would not confess to what I saw. She would confess to what she could control. She would offer a smaller truth to protect a larger lie, and she would watch my reaction like a scientist studying an animal. I was not going to be her experiment. So I did what I have always done when life tries to turn into chaos. I made it procedural. After she left for work, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a notebook I used for dull household lists. I wrote the date at the top. I wrote 3:47 a.m. under it. I wrote what I saw in plain language, with no emotion, no adjectives, no commentary, because commentary is what gets you trapped in arguments. Then I wrote one line about the lock screen preview and the tone. I did not write the name, because I did not trust my memory under anger, and I refused to let anger become my witness. That afternoon, I watched Lena through the small, normal moments that used to feel intimate. She returned home later than expected. She blamed traffic with an airy shrug. She made a joke about her day being nonstop. She moved around the kitchen like a hostess, preparing for guests we did not have. She laughed at something on her phone and quickly turned the screen away when she noticed me looking. The turning away was almost casual, but it was still turning away. At dinner, she mentioned a new project at work, something about a campaign and reputation management, and the words hit my ears differently than they used to. Reputation management. That phrase can mean marketing, or it can mean damage control, depending on who is saying it and why. Lena talked about it like it was exciting, like she had been chosen for something special. I nodded at the right moments, keeping my face neutral, while my mind replayed the lock screen preview and the way her thumbs moved at night. Later, as she washed dishes, she asked me if I was okay, because I had been quiet. Her voice carried concern, but her eyes were measuring, and that measurement told me she was testing for suspicion. I told her I was tired and had an early morning. She accepted the answer too quickly, like she was relieved it was simple. Then she hugged me from behind, and her arms felt like an apology she would never say. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to see what she did when she thought I was asleep. Lena followed later, phone in hand, screen dimmed low, pretending she was checking alarms. She slid into bed with the careful softness of a person trying not to disturb someone who might wake up and notice everything. For a while, she lay still, and I could feel her waiting, listening for my breathing to settle, timing my body like a thief timing a security camera. At 3:47 a.m., the glow returned, faint and insistent, and my eyes opened again because my body had already decided this was now a ritual. Her thumbs moved fast, faster than before, like she was racing against time, and the air in the room felt tighter than it had the night before. The phone brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, and then cut out suddenly like a blade sliding back into a sheath. This time, I did not grab my phone. I already had one screenshot, and one screenshot was enough to prove a pattern later. What I needed now was patience, and patience is the hardest thing to manufacture when betrayal is lying next to you wearing your wife's skin. I stayed still. I breathed slowly. I let her believe her performance worked. In the morning, Lena acted even more affectionate than usual, which would have been sweet if it was not so clearly strategic. She offered to make breakfast. She offered to run errands. She offered to do laundry, touching my arm as if touch could erase timestamps. I watched her with a calm face and a cold mind, and I wondered how many times she had done this, how many nights she had turned her phone into a confessional and her bed into a stage. 2 weeks can feel like a long time when you are living inside a lie, but it can also feel like nothing when the lie has been building for months. I did not confront Lena during those 2 weeks. I did not accuse her. I did not cry. I did not ask for reassurance like a man trying to save the idea of his marriage. I watched. I listened. I wrote things down. I learned her patterns, not because I wanted to control her, but because I wanted the truth to be something she could not talk her way out of. And then, on a quiet morning, when the mail arrived in a stack of ordinary envelopes, the carrier bill slid onto the table like a judge's gavel. I opened it alone, and the number stared back at me in plain ink, with no mercy and no drama. 7,439 text messages to one number, and I knew exactly who it belonged to, because some names are not discovered. They are remembered like old bruises. I folded the bill once, carefully, and set it beside my coffee cup, because that was the moment the story stopped being about suspicion and started being about proof, and I realized Lena had no idea what she had just handed me. I stared at the bill for a full minute before I let myself breathe like a normal person, because paper has a way of making denial feel childish. The number was printed again and again in neat rows, like the carrier wanted to make sure even the slowest reader would understand the theme, and every line was another small confirmation that I had been sleeping next to a woman who could type a second life into existence while I paid for the electricity. 7,439 messages did not happen by accident, and it did not happen because someone needed help with a project, unless the project was tearing down the only person still treating her like a partner. I knew the number before I even looked it up, because it belonged to Grant Pike, and Grant was the sort of man who built his whole career on being invited into rooms he should not be in. He was not a celebrity, not a politician, not anyone who would show up in gossip columns, but he moved through professional circles like a rumor with a resume. He had a reputation as a fixer, which is just a cleaner word for a man who teaches other people how to lie without sweating. I had met him once at a corporate mixer that Lena insisted I attend, the kind of event where everyone speaks in polite fragments and laughs as if laughter counts as intimacy. Grant had shaken my hand with a grip that tried too hard, and he had looked me in the eye for a second too long, the way men do when they want to measure what you will tolerate. When Lena introduced him that night, she called him a consultant, said he helped with brand strategy and crisis messaging, and I remember thinking it sounded like a job designed for people who had already created a crisis they needed to survive. Grant spoke to Lena like he already had permission to, leaning in close, saying her name like he owned it, and watching her smile widen in response. I had filed it away as harmless flirting, because we all file things away when we want the world to stay simple. Now the bill was dragging that file back out and slapping it on the table. I folded the bill and set it beside my notebook, because I was not going to treat this like an emotional collapse. I had seen too many people lose their dignity by acting like pain is proof. Pain is not proof. Pain is a reaction, and reactions are what liars use to shift blame. Lena would happily describe me as volatile if it protected her. She would gladly wear the victim costume if it got her sympathy and time. So I stayed calm, and I made the next hour boring on purpose. I pulled out my phone and took a clear photo of the bill beside that morning's newspaper, because dates matter when stories start being rewritten. Then I opened my carrier account, the one in my name, and I captured the statement line that showed the total message count and the billing period, keeping it on one screen without scrolling like I was documenting a parking ticket. I did not attempt to read her phone. I did not attempt to guess passwords. I did not attempt anything that could be framed as invasive. I took my proof from what I lawfully owned and what she had already used without thinking. When Lena came home that evening, she was bright in the way people get when they are running on adrenaline and secrecy. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off her shoes, and launched into a story about a difficult meeting and a last-minute request that kept her late. Her words flowed smoothly, almost too smoothly, like she had rehearsed them in the car before walking in. She kissed my cheek, asked how my day was, and moved straight to the kitchen to fill a glass of water, because she knew motion makes people seem innocent. I watched her from the table as she leaned against the counter and checked her phone, pretending she was only glancing. She tilted the screen away from me without looking guilty, which was almost impressive, like she believed she had outgrown guilt. Then she looked up and smiled as if she had just read a funny work meme, and she asked if I wanted to order dinner or cook. I told her I could cook because I wanted her hands busy, and busy hands make sloppy lies. While I cooked, she hovered near the hallway, phone always within reach, eyes dipping to the screen whenever it lit. She tried to hide it by talking, asking about schedules and weekend plans, but her mind kept drifting, tugged by whatever conversation she was really in. I let her talk. I nodded at the right moments. I even made one small joke that made her laugh, because laughter lowers defenses, and I needed her comfortable, not cautious. At one point, her phone buzzed, and she turned her body slightly away, the movement so automatic it looked like muscle memory. She answered quickly, then set the phone down face down, and her mouth tightened as if she was forcing herself not to smile. She glanced at me like she was checking whether I noticed. I kept stirring the pan and said nothing. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, relieved. The worst thing for a liar is uncertainty, and I refused to give her that luxury yet. I wanted her to believe she was still the one steering. Over dinner, I asked her a question that sounded harmless, the kind of question a spouse asks when trying to be supportive. I asked whether she was still working with Grant on that brand strategy project. Lena's fork paused for half a second, just long enough to be real, then she nodded and said yes, because he had been pulled in to help with some stakeholder messaging. Stakeholder messaging. The phrase slid across the table like grease. I asked whether it was stressful. She said it was, but she enjoyed the challenge, and she added that Grant was good at keeping things organized and calm. That last word, calm, made me almost laugh, because calm was her favorite adjective for anything that benefited her. Calm meetings, calm decisions, calm reactions, calm husbands. Calm was not a value to her, it was a tool she used to define who deserved respect. She said Grant kept things calm, as if she was praising him for the same thing she took from me without gratitude. I nodded like I was impressed, and I asked how long the project would run. She shrugged and said it depended, because things were fluid. Fluid meant she wanted room to maneuver. After dinner, Lena took her shower, and I listened to the water while I cleaned the kitchen, because the shower was where she reset her face. When she came out, she smelled like soap and confidence, and she curled up on the couch beside me with her phone in her hand, pretending to scroll through headlines. The screen light reflected in her eyes, and I could see how much effort she was putting into looking casual. She asked what I was watching, and I told her it was background noise. She leaned into my shoulder as if closeness could erase the bill sitting in my drawer. Later, when she fell asleep, I did not immediately follow. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook again. I wrote down the date, the time I asked about Grant, and her exact wording about stakeholder messaging and calm organization. I wrote it in plain language, because plain language is hard to argue with later. Then I wrote a line about her hesitation, the micro pause that always appears when someone is about to choose a lie. I did not insult her on the page. I did not write angry guesses. I wrote only what happened, because I was building a timeline, not a poem. The next morning, I called the carrier and requested a printable statement for the billing period, because I knew a screenshot could be dismissed as cropped by a desperate spouse, even if it was real. The representative told me what they could provide, and I stayed polite because politeness makes people helpful. When the document arrived in my email, I saved the header and printed it, then signed the back with the date. It felt absurd to sign a piece of paper like I was entering evidence into a trial, but my marriage had already become a courtroom in Lena's head, and I refused to be the only person showing up unprepared. That afternoon, Lena texted me that she would be late again because of a last-minute call. A minute later, she sent another message repeating the same reason with slightly different words. The duplication looked harmless on the surface, but it felt scripted, like she was trying to lock an alibi into place by repetition. I placed the two texts side by side on my screen and took a screenshot. I did not need to prove she was lying yet. I needed to prove she had a pattern of performing consistency when she felt pressure. Over the next few days, I watched the rhythm of our house change. Lena started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. She started taking calls in the bathroom with the fan on. She started stepping outside onto the balcony for air whenever her phone buzzed. She began using the same phrases more often, talking about boundaries, stress, and needing support. The words sounded like they had been given to her, like she was practicing a future conversation where she would be the reasonable one and I would be the problem. Every time she used those phrases, I wrote them down. Then the pressure came from outside, right on schedule, because secrets never stay contained when two people are texting that much. Ruth, Lena's mother, called me on a Thursday evening with a voice that sounded sweet but carried a sharpened edge. She asked if everything was okay between me and Lena. She said Lena seemed tired and overwhelmed. She said Lena mentioned feeling watched, and she worried about her daughter. Watched. That word was not accidental. It was a seed. It was the beginning of a narrative where my attention to facts could be framed as control. I told Ruth that Lena was safe and that we were working through normal stress. I did not accuse Lena to her mother because accusations are the fastest way to turn a liar into a martyr. Ruth asked if I had been checking Lena's phone. I almost smiled at the audacity of it, because the woman who raised Lena was now testing whether I would confess to wrongdoing I had not done. I said no, and I said it clearly, because clarity matters when people are fishing. Ruth hesitated, then said Lena needed support, not suspicion. I replied that support does not require me to be blind. After the call, I saved the call log time on my phone, because if Lena was already using her mother as an early witness to my supposed behavior, then I needed a record of when the framing began. I was not going to argue about it later with nothing but my memory. Memory is the liar's playground. Paper is not. That night, at 3:47 a.m., the phone glow returned again, and I felt my patience tighten like a muscle. Lena's thumbs moved fast, and she angled the phone slightly away even though she believed I was asleep, because habit does not disappear in the dark. When the screen went black, I heard her exhale, and I understood something that made my stomach cold. She was not only hiding an affair, she was practicing control. She was rehearsing a version of reality where she could do whatever she wanted and still define me as the problem for noticing. In the morning, she was affectionate again, overly affectionate, which was either guilt or strategy, and with Lena it was usually strategy. She asked if I wanted to go to a corporate charity event with her next week, a small gathering that would include colleagues and donors. She said it would be good for us to show a united front. United front. The phrase landed like a dare. She wanted my presence as a prop, not as a partner. She wanted me smiling in the room so she could keep texting Grant without suspicion from people who liked tidy stories. I agreed to go because I understood what she was offering without realizing it. A public room full of witnesses. A setting where her phone habits would be visible. An opportunity to see who she looked for when she walked in. An opportunity to watch Grant's behavior with my own eyes, without any illegal tricks. Lena thought she was inviting me to help her keep face. She did not understand she was inviting me into the stage where her lies would finally have to breathe air. That evening, as she got ready for bed, she left her phone on the dresser for a moment, and the screen lit with a preview that showed a name I recognized, not because I had read her messages, but because I had already seen it in professional contexts. Grant. Just his first name, clean and confident, like he never needed to hide because he believed the world would protect him. Lena snatched the phone up quickly and smiled at me as if nothing happened. I smiled back, because by then I had stopped craving the truth from her mouth. I already had the truth in numbers, timestamps, and printed paper, and the best part was she still believed this was a private game. She did not realize the bill had turned it into a documented one, and she did not realize I was done reacting the way she expected. I turned off the light and lay down beside her, listening to her breathing settle, and I thought about the event next week, the room full of witnesses, and the man behind that number. I did not need a dramatic confrontation. I needed one clean moment where her story would collide with a record she could not charm. And if she insisted on texting him in the dark at 3:47 a.m., then she was already building the countdown for me. By the end of that week, I stopped thinking of my marriage as something I could fix with effort and started thinking of it as something I could only understand with records. Love is an emotion, but trust is a system, and Lena had been quietly dismantling the system while smiling like she was doing home improvement. Every time she said a new word like boundaries or united front, I heard the real meaning underneath it. She was building a story where she could do what she wanted and still look like the responsible one, and she was doing it with the same neat confidence she used at work. So I made my own story boring and unbreakable. I took a clean sheet of paper and drew a simple table with columns for date, time, location, and claim. I did not write, "My wife is cheating." I wrote, "Lena said she had a last-minute call, Thursday, 7:12 p.m. I wrote, "Lena said stakeholder messaging kept her late, Monday, 6:48 p.m. I wrote, "Lena asked for a united front at donor event, Wednesday, 8:06 p.m. If someone read it, it would look like a man tracking normal life. That was the point. Truth should look normal until it is forced to speak. The next step was not her phone. The next step was timing. Lena had routines she thought were invisible. She always left 5 minutes later on days she wore the navy blazer because she liked to check her hair twice. She always came home later on days she had calls because she did not like being rushed into playing wife. She always showered longer on nights she had been texting, like hot water could rinse out the guilt. I started marking those patterns on my table, not as proof, but as context. Context is what turns a single strange moment into a clear pattern. On Saturday, she insisted we go grocery shopping together, and I almost respected the attempt at normalcy because it was so carefully timed. People who lie like Lena do not do it with chaos. They do it with structure. She walked beside me through the aisles, touching my sleeve now and then, making small comments about what we should cook, like we were a couple who had nothing to hide. But her phone vibrated twice, and both times she checked the screen too quickly, then smiled at nothing, then slid the phone back into her pocket like she was hiding candy from a child. At the checkout, the cashier printed our receipt with the time at the bottom, and I noticed it the way you notice a detail when your mind has been trained into vigilance. I did not ask for a copy. I did not do anything weird. I simply folded the receipt and put it in my wallet instead of tossing it in the trash. I told myself it was just good budgeting, and that was not even a lie. Receipts are not only about money. They are about being able to prove you were where you said you were, and I had a feeling proving locations was about to become a valuable hobby. That evening, Lena took a call on the balcony while pretending she was just stepping out for air. I could hear her voice through the closed glass door, soft and careful. Nothing like the crisp voice she used on work calls. She was not saying anything explicit. She did not need to. The tone was the giveaway. The way she laughed quietly, the way she paused as if listening closely, the way she said a short phrase and then went silent. When she came back inside, she told me it was a co-worker who needed quick advice. I nodded and asked which co-worker. She said it was someone from the broader team, then corrected herself and said it was someone from an adjacent department, then laughed and said it did not matter. 3 versions in 10 seconds, all delivered casually, all meant to sound like an innocent brain searching for details. I smiled and let it pass, then wrote it down later as contradiction in cover story. I did not even need a name. I needed the wobble. On Monday morning, I acted like I was still the same man who believed his marriage was a private partnership and not a public performance. I kissed Lena goodbye and told her to have a good day. She smiled and said she would. Then she asked, almost casually, whether I planned to come to the charity event with her next week. She said it mattered, because donors liked stability, and people made assumptions when they saw a woman alone. I told her I would be there. Her relief was immediate, and it almost made me sad because it meant my presence was not about companionship. It was about optics. She needed me as a prop the way she needed a good blazer or a polished pitch. I watched her walk out the door with her confident posture and her phone clutched in her hand like a second heartbeat, and I realized something that should have been obvious earlier. Lena did not fear betrayal. She feared being seen. That afternoon, I opened the shared calendar on our home laptop, the one both of us used for normal planning, and I looked at the week around the event. I did not dig into anything private. I did not access anything that was not already shared. I simply took a screenshot of the calendar header that showed the date and the event title because it was in the open and because I wanted to mark the timeline. The charity gathering was on Thursday night. Lena had blocked the entire afternoon with a vague label, the kind of label that meant nothing and could mean anything. It was the perfect shape for a lie. I printed the calendar view and placed it in a clear sleeve with a small label because I had stopped trusting my future self to remember details under pressure. Then I created a folder in my desk drawer, not a secret vault, not a dramatic shrine, just a plain folder with a date written on it. If Lena ever asked what it was, I could truthfully tell her it was household paperwork. She loved paperwork when it protected her. She hated paperwork when it trapped her. By Tuesday, the pressure outside our house began to smell like smoke. I noticed it first through a mutual friend, a woman Lena liked because she was useful and disliked because she was perceptive. The friend sent Lena a message while I was sitting nearby, and Lena's face tightened for a second when she read it, then softened again. She replied quickly and placed the phone face down like she always did when she wanted to look innocent. I asked what was wrong, keeping my tone light. Lena said it was nothing, just people being dramatic about workplace gossip. Workplace gossip, she said, as if gossip was a storm that happened to her and not a fire she kept feeding. That night, she was even more careful with her phone, and the care itself was evidence. She waited until I turned the light off. She waited until my breathing slowed. She waited, and then the glow returned at 3:47 a.m., as if she was obeying a schedule she could not break. Her thumbs moved, quick and practiced. Then the glow snapped off. She rolled toward me and pressed her shoulder against mine, as if physical closeness could cancel digital betrayal. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and counted my breaths until anger became something colder and more useful. On Wednesday, Lena came home with a gift bag and a look of performative excitement. She said the charity event had a theme this year, something about community leadership and renewal. She said the donors would love it. She said there would be speeches and photos and a small program booklet for guests. She held the bag out to me like she was rewarding me for agreeing to show up. Inside was a tie, expensive, subtle, the kind of tie you wear when you want to look like a man who has nothing to hide. I thanked her and tried not to laugh at the irony. She was dressing me for my own role in her show, and she believed she was the director. That night after she went to bed, I searched her name on public social media using my own account, not because I wanted to stalk, but because public tags and public posts are not private secrets. I saw nothing dramatic, nothing explicit, just the usual polished posts and tasteful comments, the same curated version of her life that made other people trust her. Then I checked the charity organization's public page because charity people love publicity. And there it was, a post about the upcoming event with a public RSVP link. It was a generic announcement, but it confirmed something important. The event was designed to be photographed and shared. Witnesses would not be scarce. They would be invited. I saved the public post link, then took a screenshot with the date visible. I did not feel proud. I felt steady. When you live with a person who is building a narrative against you, steadiness is survival. Thursday arrived like a polite threat. Lena spent the morning in a high-energy mood, talking too much, laughing too easily, making little jokes about how I would charm donors. She was trying to make the day feel light so I would not ask questions. She was also checking her phone constantly, and every time it buzzed, she seemed to soften in a way she did not soften around me anymore. It was subtle, but it was real, and real is rare in a liar. In the afternoon, she said she needed to leave early for prep and a quick planning session. She said there were last-minute changes, because events always had surprises. She kissed my cheek and told me to meet her there at 7. Her cover story sounded perfectly reasonable. It was also perfectly useful. As soon as she left, I looked at the shared calendar again and compared her blocked time to the event details on the public page. There was a gap. A comfortable gap that could fit a planning session or something else entirely. I wrote the gap on my table, then wrote her exact wording, last-minute changes. Words matter, because words are what she would later use as a shield. At 6:30, I got dressed in the tie she bought me, because I wanted her to see me wearing her idea of innocence. I arrived at the venue early, not to ambush her, not to start a scene, but to observe. The entrance area was busy with staff carrying boxes and arranging signs. Guests began to filter in, laughing, greeting each other, and scanning the room with the casual hunger of people who wanted to be seen. I took it all in and stayed near the edges, because edges let you watch without becoming part of the performance. When Lena finally arrived, she did not arrive alone. She stepped into the lobby with the kind of confident smile she wore when she wanted to own a room, but her eyes flicked to one side first, quick and automatic, like checking whether someone important was close enough. Then I saw him. Grant Pike, wearing a suit that fit too well, standing just behind her shoulder like he belonged there. Lena laughed at something he said, and the laugh was not the polite laugh she gave coworkers. It was warm, private, familiar. She saw me and her smile held, but her posture changed, a tiny stiffening that told me she had not expected me early. Grant's eyes met mine, and he gave me a small nod that carried too much confidence, like he was acknowledging a man who did not understand the room's real hierarchy. Lena walked over and kissed me, then introduced Grant again, calling him a partner on the project, saying he had helped secure some donor alignment. Donor alignment. Another smooth phrase. Another tidy explanation. I shook Grant's hand and felt his grip tighten slightly, a subtle test. I returned the grip with polite indifference, because men like him feed on reaction. Then I watched Lena's eyes bounce between us like she was measuring risk. That was when I noticed something else. Something so small, it could have been nothing. but nothing rarely appears twice. Lena's phone was in her hand, and when the screen lit, she tilted it away from both of us, fast and automatic, as if hiding was now her default setting, even in a public lobby. I did not confront her. I did not make a face. I simply smiled and asked where our seats were. Lena said there were no assigned seats, just mingling, and she said it too quickly, like she did not want me looking for a list. Then she added that the host had a program booklet with the schedule and the main remarks. She pointed toward a table near the entrance where staff were stacking those booklets, and I saw the neat piles and the glossy covers and the list of names inside waiting to be read. Programs are funny things. They exist to tell people what to expect. They also exist to put names on paper. Lena moved away to greet someone important. Grant followed a step behind her, and I stayed near the entrance table, watching staff place the last stack of booklets down. A volunteer smiled at me and offered one. I thanked her and took it, feeling the weight of it in my hand like a simple object that might soon become a weapon without anyone realizing. I opened the booklet and scanned the first pages, taking in sponsor names and committee roles, and then I saw something that made my throat tighten, not from shock, but from confirmation. Grant's name was listed under a planning role that implied he had been involved far earlier than Lena had ever admitted. That meant one of two things. Either Lena had been lying about the timeline, or she had been lying about what the relationship really was, and at this point, I suspected she was lying about both. I closed the booklet and held it at my side, feeling calm settle in like a lock clicking shut. Lena had brought me into a public room to help her look stable. She had brought her lover into the same room because she believed she could control the story. And she had handed me a printed list of names that did not match her version of reality. I looked across the lobby and watched Lena laugh again, watched Grant lean in as if he had already earned the right, and I realized the event had not even started yet. The first crack in her story was already in my hand, and the night was still young. The program booklet was glossy, thick, and proud of itself, like paper could make people virtuous by association. Grant Pike's name sat there in black ink under a planning role, neat and undeniable, and I could already hear Lena's future explanation forming in her head, the one where this meant nothing, and I was overthinking. The problem for her was that paper does not care how charming you are, and committees do not list strangers by accident. I did not rush toward her with it like a wounded man waving a flag. I folded the booklet closed and held it at my side, calm enough to look bored, because boredom is the best camouflage in a room full of attention addicts. The lobby smelled like perfume, catered appetizers, and the mild panic of people trying to appear generous. Donors drifted in clusters, laughing too loudly, scanning the room to see who mattered tonight. Staff moved briskly, pretending the event was smooth, while quietly fixing every small mistake. Lena was already in that mode where she becomes a product. Her posture was perfect, her smile was controlled, and she used my presence as an accessory, the way she used her dress, the lighting, and her phone's placement. Grant stayed close enough to look involved, but not close enough to look guilty, which told me he understood optics as well as she did. They moved from person to person like a practiced pair, and every time Lena laughed, I could see her eyes check for Grant's reaction first, as if his approval was the real prize. I walked deeper into the venue and let the crowd swallow me, because I did not need a confrontation. I needed a record. The first rule was simple. If Lena wanted a public stage, then she would get public documentation. Near the entrance, a volunteer table had a small sign-in pad, a stack of name tags, and a clipboard with check marks. It was not secret. It was not guarded. It was the kind of mundane administrative thing people ignore until it becomes useful. A volunteer with an eager smile asked whether I needed help finding my name tag. I told her I was meeting my wife inside and asked, casually, whether the planning committee arrived earlier for setup. She nodded and said yes. Most of them had been here since late afternoon, because the schedule was tight. I asked who the lead was tonight, the person coordinating speeches and photos. She pointed toward a woman with a headset and said that was the event coordinator, and she added that Grant had been in and out with vendors all week. All week, she said, like it was an ordinary fact and not a timeline shift that cracked Lena's story. I thanked the volunteer and stepped away without writing anything down in the moment, because writing in front of witnesses makes you look like an investigator, and I did not need anyone giving Lena a warning. Instead, I walked toward the bar, where the lighting was softer and the noise was louder, and I let my face settle into a mild smile that suggested I was here to sip something expensive and pretend I cared. The bartender asked what I wanted. I ordered something simple and watched the room while he poured. From where I stood, I could see Lena greet a donor couple with the kind of warmth she only used for people who could help her. Grant hovered close, smiling, nodding, then leaning in to say something that made Lena laugh. She touched his arm for a fraction of a second, quick enough to look like nothing, familiar enough to make my jaw tighten. A few feet away, an older man with a sponsor pin spoke loudly about integrity, because the world loves irony when it is wearing a tuxedo. Lena nodded at him, eyes bright, and I watched her become the person he wanted to believe in. That was always her real skill. She could sell safety while building danger. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A bank notification, the kind I usually ignored because adult life is just a slow drip of transactions. I glanced at it and felt the temperature in my head drop. There was a charge from a boutique hotel bar across town, a place Lena had mentioned once as a networking spot for after-hours meetings. The charge was small, but the merchant name was clear, and it hit me with a simple, ugly truth. Either Lena was using my account for her little nights out, or Grant was, or both. I did not react. I did not stare at the screen too long. I simply took a screenshot of the alert, making sure the time and merchant name were visible, then slid my phone back into my pocket as if I had just checked the weather. It was not proof of cheating by itself, but it was proof of overlap, and overlap is where lies go to die. The MC tapped the microphone and asked guests to move into the ballroom. People flowed in like a slow tide, taking seats at round tables with white cloths and name cards. I watched Lena guide a donor toward a table near the front, then watched her glance back over her shoulder, searching. She was looking for Grant. She was not looking for me. That detail was small and brutal. I took a seat at the edge of the room, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid being trapped in conversation. A program booklet sat at each place setting, and I picked mine up again. This time I opened it to the committee page, lifted my phone, and took a clear photo of Grant's name beside the event logo. I did it quietly, the way people take pictures of menus, because blending in is easy in a room full of people documenting their own importance. The speeches began. The MC praised the community, praised the donors, praised the volunteers, and then thanked the planning committee by name. I listened as the list rolled out, and when Grant Pike's name was spoken into a microphone in a room full of witnesses, my stomach went cold with satisfaction. Names spoken on record do not disappear later, just because someone smiles hard enough. Lena clapped with enthusiasm when Grant's name was mentioned. Her hands moved fast, proud and automatic, like she was cheering for her own secret. I watched her glance toward him, and the glance was loaded, quick, and intimate. Grant kept his face controlled, but he smiled slightly, like a man receiving a gift. The applause faded. Dinner service began. Plates clinked. People leaned toward each other and spoke in low voices, the kind of voices that build alliances and destroy reputations. Lena moved between tables, greeting people, posing for quick photos. Grant shadowed her with the calm patience of a man used to being brought into other people's marriages without consequence. Then I saw the first real crack. A staff member approached Lena with a small, tense expression, and I watched Lena's face shift in a way I recognized. It was the expression she used when something threatened her control. She nodded and followed the staff member toward a side door near the stage. Grant followed a step behind, smooth and uninvited, like he knew he belonged in every emergency. They disappeared into a short hallway that led to the service area. I did not chase them like a jealous husband in a bad drama. I stood, picked up my drink, and walked in the same direction at a normal pace, stopping near the corridor entrance as if I was simply looking for the restroom. From there, I could see enough without acting like I was hunting. The door to a small staff area was half open. Lena's voice came through in a low, sharp tone, not loud enough to draw attention, but sharp enough to show strain. Grant replied in a quieter voice I could not fully hear. Then Lena said a phrase I had heard at home more and more lately, something about needing me steady tonight and not making things harder. She did not say it like she was worried about my feelings. She said it like she was managing a risk. Grant made a short sound that could have been amusement. Then Lena said something that landed like a punch, even without full context. She said they had to stop writing so much because the bill was in my name. My name. So it was not only that she was texting him, it was that she knew it was visible. She knew it would land on my table. She knew, and she kept doing it anyway. There is a special kind of contempt in that, the kind that assumes you will always be too polite to notice. I did not step in. I did not burst through the door. I did not give her the gift of immediate conflict. I turned away calmly and walked back into the ballroom like a man returning from the restroom, because the best part of hearing the truth is letting the liar keep believing you are blind. Back at my table, I sat down and opened my notes app under the table, hands steady, face neutral. I typed one line with a timestamp. Lena referenced my bill and message volume in staff corridor. Then I stopped. I did not write a paragraph. I did not vent. I documented. When Lena returned, she was smiling again, too bright, too fast, like she had just shoved panic into a closet. She walked to my table, placed a hand on my shoulder, and asked if I was having a good time. I told her I was fine. She leaned in and asked whether I needed anything. The question sounded caring, but her eyes were checking me, scanning for suspicion like a security guard scans bags. I told her I was good and asked whether everything backstage was okay. She hesitated, then said it was just a minor schedule issue, nothing important. The lie was clean. The lie was also unnecessary, which is how you know it is habit. Grant appeared behind her a moment later, holding a drink, acting like he belonged at my table. He made small talk about the event, about donors, about community impact, using phrases that sounded noble and empty at the same time. I nodded politely because I had no interest in debating morality with a man who treated marriage like a networking resource. Then Lena's phone buzzed, and the screen lit. She tilted it away, quick and practiced, and I saw a name flash for half a second before her thumb covered it. Grant. It was the simplest proof in the world, a lock screen preview in a public room, and it made me almost laugh at how desperate they were to hide while standing under a chandelier. I stood and excused myself, saying I wanted some fresh air. Lena's eyes tracked me, careful and alert. Grant's eyes stayed on me too, calculating. As I walked toward the lobby, I passed the volunteer table again and noticed the clipboard, still there, still full of check marks. I did not touch it. I did not photograph it. I did not need to. I already had something better, something spoken aloud on a microphone and printed in a program. In the lobby, I opened the public charity page again and refreshed it. A new story post had gone up, tagged with the venue and the event name. It showed a short clip of Lena laughing beside Grant in the ballroom, framed like a harmless professional moment, but to anyone with eyes it looked like intimacy wearing a blazer. I captured the story with the date stamp visible and saved it. Public tags are honest in a way people are not. I put my phone away and stood near the entrance doors, letting the cold night air hit my face through the glass. I did not feel grief anymore. I felt clarity. The phone bill was not an accident. The program listing was not an accident. The public clip was not an accident. Lena was building a second life in plain sight, and she believed she could use my calm as cover. Behind me, the ballroom noise swelled again, full of laughter and speeches about community. Lena would return to that room and keep smiling until the moment her smile stopped working. I did not know exactly when I would force that moment, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight gave me witnesses, paper, timestamps, and a public record, and Lena did not even realize she had stepped into my timeline. When I went back inside, Lena turned toward me immediately, eyes sharp, and I could see her trying to decide whether I had seen too much. I smiled at her the same way I always did, mild and controlled, and I watched her relax just enough to make her next mistake. Then her phone buzzed again, and this time she looked down too long, and the smile she tried to hide never fully disappeared. Lena's smile was the kind that could pass a donor audit, but it could not pass a marriage audit, because I knew the source code now. She looked down at her phone for a beat too long, and the corner of her mouth lifted like she had been handed a private joke. Then she remembered I existed and forced her face back into neutrality. That tiny delay was all it took for me to understand how far gone she was. She was not slipping, she was living in the slip. When the event finally ended, she insisted we stay for the last round of thank yous, the last photos, the last handshakes. She moved through the crowd like she was collecting receipts of her own, little moments she could later show to people as proof that she was stable, respected, and loyal to her community. Grant stayed near her, never too close in front of the wrong eyes, never too far when she needed reassurance. Watching them was like watching two professionals performing a duet while pretending it was an accident. In the parking lot, Lena linked her arm through mine, a gesture meant for anyone who might be watching from the entrance. Her grip was firm, possessive, like she was staking a claim. Grant walked a few steps behind, talking on his phone with the casual confidence of a man who never feared consequences. Lena turned her head slightly and smiled at something he said without looking back, because she did not need to look back anymore. She knew he was there. In the car, Lena exhaled like the night had been hard work, and she laughed about how smooth everything went despite the minor schedule issue. She used that phrase again, the same phrase, and the repetition made it sound less like memory and more like a script. She asked if I was proud of her. She asked if I noticed how many people complimented her. She asked if I saw how impressed the donors were. She asked those questions in a row, too fast, like she needed to pin my approval to her lapel before I could remove it. I told her she did well. I kept my voice flat, supportive enough to keep her comfortable, empty enough to keep me safe. Lena nodded, satisfied, then glanced at her phone again, pretending she was checking the time. The screen lit, and the reflection danced across her face. She did not answer any messages in the car, but her thumb hovered like an addict hovering over a bottle. At home, she kicked off her heels, loosened her hair, and moved toward the bathroom. She said she needed to wash the night off. I watched her disappear into the hallway with her phone in hand, and I thought about the bank alert, the program booklet, the public story clip, and the corridor comment about the bill in my name. It was not one proof. It was a web. And a web does not need a confession. It only needs tension. I waited until she was in the shower and the fan was on, because she always used noise when she wanted to feel invisible. I went to my desk drawer, pulled out the clear sleeve folder, and added the new pieces carefully, as if I was organizing tax documents instead of saving my sanity. I slipped in the photo of the program page with Grant's name. I slipped in the screenshot of the public story clip with the date stamp visible. I slipped in the screenshot of the merchant alert from the hotel bar. I took a photo of the folder contents laid out on my desk with the clock on my monitor visible, because my mind did not trust time anymore unless time was captured. Then I put everything back and returned to the couch, because the most important part of catching a liar is not looking like you are catching them. Lena came out of the shower wearing one of my shirts, the way she did when she wanted to play nostalgic wife. She climbed onto the couch beside me, curled close, and rested her head on my shoulder. Her hair was damp, her skin smelled clean, and her body language tried to tell me she was ours again. Her phone sat face down on the cushion beside her thigh, close enough to touch without looking desperate. She asked whether I thought Grant was helpful to the charity. She asked it casually, but the question was bait, because she wanted to hear me say something negative so she could label me jealous. I told her he seemed engaged. I told her the committee sounded grateful. I kept it bland and factual. Lena smiled like she was relieved I was not being difficult, and she kissed my jawline, a soft gesture with a sharp purpose. A minute later, her phone buzzed, and she flinched. She recovered quickly, then picked it up and glanced at the screen, eyes narrowing in that focused way she used when she was reading something that mattered. She did not answer. She did not even smile. She simply turned the screen away from me and set it down again. I asked whether everything was okay. She said it was just a colleague asking about follow-ups. She said she would handle it tomorrow. She said it was nothing, and then she added, too fast, that she was glad I came tonight because it helped her. Helped her. Another phrase that sounded like gratitude but felt like management. I let the silence sit between us, because silence makes people talk when they are insecure. Lena shifted, adjusted her position, and asked if I wanted to plan a weekend trip soon. Something relaxing. Something for us. The offer was sudden, not connected to anything, and that made it suspicious. People who are happy do not suddenly offer vacations like bribes. People who are scared do. I told her we could talk about it later. Her eyes flicked to my face, searching. She wanted to read whether I was pulling away. She wanted to know whether my calm was still the kind she could use. When she did not get the answer she wanted, she changed tactics, leaning into me and making small talk until the conversation felt normal again. That was her skill. She could make any room feel like nothing happened, even when something happened. At 3:47 a.m., her phone glow returned, and I felt my jaw tighten without moving. She rolled away slightly, angled the screen, and tapped fast. The glow cut out quickly, faster than before, like she was trying to reduce exposure now that she had mentioned the bill. That told me she knew she was vulnerable. She just did not know how vulnerable. The next morning, Lena's mood was too bright, as if she was compensating for a night of secrecy with an overdose of cheer. She made coffee. She offered to make breakfast. She asked about my schedule. She asked whether I had any plans that evening. She was gathering information, not out of care, but out of positioning. I watched her hands move around the kitchen and thought about how easily she could look domestic while her mind was somewhere else. When she left for work, she kissed me longer than usual and said she loved me. The words landed like a prop. I nodded, said I loved her too, and watched her walk out the door with her phone already in her hand. As soon as the door closed, I opened my notebook and wrote down the moment. I wrote, "Lena said I love you, morning after event." Because if the day came when she claimed I was distant, cold, or unkind, I wanted my record to show that I stayed consistent even while she changed realities. By midday, the first ripple hit. A mutual friend texted me, someone from our broader social circle who loved gossip but pretended she loved concern. She asked how the charity event went. She said she saw a clip online of Lena laughing with Grant, and it looked like they were a great team. Great team. That phrase was the soft entry point for a harder rumor. I replied politely, said the event went well, and left it there. Then I saved the message, because I wanted proof of when the public narrative began to shift. An hour later, Lena called me during her lunch break, which she rarely did. She asked, casually, whether anyone had mentioned the event clip to me. Her tone was light, but her timing was not. That meant she had already heard people talking. That meant the clip was spreading. That meant she was worried, not about betraying me, but about being seen doing it. I told her someone asked how the event went, nothing more. She laughed in a way that sounded forced and said, People always talk. Then she said something sharper under the laugh. Something about how some people love to create stories when there was nothing there. Nothing there. She needed that phrase out loud because she was rehearsing denial. She asked me if I believed her. I told her I believed facts. There was a brief pause on the line, the kind of pause you can feel. Then she said she had to go back to work. She hung up quickly, as if the conversation was too hot to hold. I saved the call log time and wrote it down, because that was the first time she tested my position directly. That evening, Lena came home later than usual and blamed a planning debrief with Grant. She said the charity board wanted immediate follow-up notes, and Grant stayed to help. She said it like it was generous, like he was doing her a favor. I nodded and asked where they met for the debrief. Lena said the office. Then she corrected herself and said a cafe near the office. Then she added that it did not matter because it was still work. 3 versions again. I asked which cafe. She named one, a place I knew because we had been there together. Then she quickly changed the subject, asking whether I wanted dinner. I let it drop because the point was not to get the truth from her mouth. The point was to let her keep stacking contradictions until they became heavy enough to collapse. While she cooked, her phone buzzed, and she stepped into the hallway to answer. She came back smiling, and she said it was just Grant confirming next steps. Next steps. That phrase had become her new wallpaper. I watched her move around the kitchen, and for a moment I felt something close to pity, not because she was trapped, but because she believed she was untouchable. She believed her performance was enough. She believed my calm was weakness. She believed the world would always prefer her polished narrative to my quiet records. After dinner, I took out the trash and checked the mailbox, because I wanted to see whether any new paper had arrived. A plain envelope was wedged among flyers, addressed to Lena in a corporate font, the kind of envelope that looks harmless until it is not. I did not open it. I did not touch it beyond pulling it free. I brought the mail inside and placed it on the counter like a normal husband. Lena saw the envelope, and her face tightened for half a second, then smoothed. She said it was probably just event paperwork. She said it casually, but her hand reached for it too quickly, like she was afraid I might read the return address. Her fingers closed around it, and she slid it into her bag without opening it in front of me. That was not how people treat harmless paperwork. That was how they treat risk. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, listening to her breathing, listening to the soft clicks of her phone when she thought I was gone. I did not feel rage anymore. Rage is a fire that burns the person holding it. I felt something else, something colder and steadier. I felt like a man watching a dam crack, not because he wanted a flood, but because he was done pretending the water was not rising. And when I finally closed my eyes, I knew the next phase was simple. Lena had started asking whether I believed her, and that meant she could feel the ground shifting under her. She was not asking for love. She was asking for permission. I was not going to give it to her. The morning after Lena asked whether I believed her, I stopped calling it insecurity and started calling it positioning. People who are innocent do not negotiate belief. They offer clarity. Lena offered questions, tone, and pressure because she wanted the outcome without the cost of facts. I kept my routine normal because normal routine is the best way to watch someone else break theirs. I went to work. I answered emails. I made a grocery list. I asked Lena how her day was in the same calm voice I always used. She responded with a bright, practiced energy that felt disconnected from the words. The only thing that felt real was her phone, which never left her body for more than a minute. That afternoon, another notification hit my account, and this one was not a hotel bar. It was a rideshare charge, small enough to look harmless, but the pickup time was late, and the location was nowhere near our home or her office. I did not assume. I did not accuse. I took a screenshot. Then I logged the time on paper and placed it in the clear sleeve with the rest. If it was nothing, it would remain nothing. If it matched a future lie, it would become a nail. When Lena came home, she was carrying 2 coffees in 1 cardboard tray, like she was bringing peace offerings. She handed one to me and said she grabbed it on the way because she thought of me. The gesture should have felt sweet. It felt tactical. Her eyes stayed on my face while I took the cup, as if she was measuring whether sugar could smooth suspicion. I thanked her and asked where she stopped. She said she went to a roaster near her office. Then she added that Grant had suggested it because the staff there knew the charity crowd. She said it quickly, casual, like she was giving me an innocent detail. Then she watched my reaction too carefully, and I understood the purpose of the detail. She was creating a harmless reason for Grant's name to exist in our kitchen, on our timeline, in her stories. I nodded and said it sounded fine. I let her keep breathing easily. That night, she cooked dinner again, and she talked too much while doing it, telling me about meetings, deadlines, donor follow-ups, and a board email chain that kept growing. She said the charity chair wanted a debrief packet, and the committee was pushing for quick visibility. She said she might need to meet Grant again to finalize the post-event report. I asked, lightly, whether the charity had meeting notes or minutes for that debrief. She paused with a knife in her hand, just long enough to show she did not like the question. Then she smiled and said it was informal, not a real meeting, just a quick alignment. Quick alignment. Another phrase meant to sound normal and mean nothing. She moved the knife again, faster, like motion could cut through tension. I did not press. I waited. Later, when she went to shower, her phone stayed on the kitchen counter for the first time in days. I noticed immediately because she had trained me to notice. The screen was face down, as if she believed face down meant safe, and that small mistake told me she was getting tired. People are careful when they feel in control. They get sloppy when they feel pressured. I did not touch the phone. I did not pick it up. I did not look for a lock screen preview. I simply watched it from across the room as it buzzed twice. The first time it buzzed and stopped. The second time it buzzed longer, and the screen lit briefly before going dark again. Even from a distance, I could see one thing clearly. The message preview was long enough to be more than a simple work question. It looked like a paragraph. It looked like intimacy pretending to be logistics. When Lena came back, she grabbed the phone too fast, then forced a laugh and said she must have left it behind by accident. She said it like she was joking about being scatterbrained, but she was not scatterbrained. She was controlled. The joke was camouflage. The next morning, a different kind of pressure arrived, the kind that always smells like family. Ruth, her mother, texted me and asked if I could call her later. The message was polite, but the timing was not. Ruth did not reach out unless Lena had prompted it. I saved the message and waited until afternoon, then called when I could speak without Lena overhearing. Ruth sounded concerned, the kind of concern that carries accusation inside it. She said Lena felt overwhelmed and misunderstood. She said Lena had mentioned tension at home. She said Lena worried I was keeping score. Keeping score was a phrase designed to make facts sound petty. I told Ruth that I was not keeping score. I was keeping track of reality. I said it calmly, because calm is the only language people respect when they are trying to paint you as unstable. Ruth asked whether I thought Lena was doing something wrong. I said I thought Lena was hiding something and building excuses around it. Ruth sighed, then said, "Marriages required trust." I did not argue with her. I simply said, "Trust is not a gift you demand," while deleting messages at 3:47 a.m. I did not shout. I did not insult. I used the one detail that was concrete and undeniable. Ruth went quiet, and when she spoke again, her tone changed. She asked how I knew about that time. I told her I woke up and saw the glow more than once, and I was done pretending it was nothing. I left it there. I ended the call politely and saved the call log time like it was a receipt. When I hung up, I realized something important. Lena had already begun recruiting witnesses, not to defend her truth, but to defend her narrative. She was laying groundwork, and groundwork means she expected impact. So I built my own groundwork, just cleaner. I searched the charity's public website and found the general contact email for the event coordinator. I wrote a short message from my own account, polite and harmless, asking whether the organization could share the post-event debrief summary or committee follow-up schedule, because I was a donor guest and wanted to understand the next steps. I did not mention Lena. I did not mention Grant. I did not accuse anyone. I asked for a public-facing document that organizations often share anyway. Within a day, the coordinator replied with a brief note and an attached summary document, nothing confidential, just a simple outline of post-event actions and a list of committee members responsible for follow-ups. Grant Pike's name was there again, tied to a specific task and a specific timeline that predated Lena's supposed recent project. It was not a confession, but it was a timeline anchor, and anchors are what keep lies from drifting. I printed the email with headers visible, signed the back, and added it to the folder. That evening, Lena came home with a new kind of energy, sharp and restless. She started talking about money, about budgets, about how expensive the event had been. She said the charity board might ask some committee members to cover minor gaps, and she wanted to make sure our finances were flexible. She said it like she was being responsible, but it felt like she was preparing me for spending she did not want to explain. I asked casually whether any of the rideshare charges on my account were hers. Her face changed in a blink, not anger, not fear, but calculation. Then she smiled and said she did not think so. She said she mostly used her own card. She said maybe it was a mistake. She said she would check later. She did not ask to see the charge. She did not ask for details. A responsible person would want details. Lena wanted the conversation to end. I said okay, and let it end. That night, she tried to be intimate, not in a warm way, but in a controlled way, like intimacy was a button she could press to reset my suspicion. She touched my arm, she leaned close, she spoke softly, and she watched my face the entire time. I let her, because rejecting her too abruptly would give her a reason to call me cold. I gave her no dramatic rejection, no angry outburst, no clean villain role. Instead, I did something she could not read. I started planning quietly. The next day, I booked a consultation with a civil mediator, not for revenge, not for drama, but for information. I used my own name, my own calendar, and my own money. I chose a neutral office with a standard scheduling email because I wanted a record. When the appointment confirmation arrived, I saved it and printed it. Nothing about it was illegal. Nothing about it was secret. It was a man preparing to protect himself like an adult. When Lena asked what I was doing on Friday afternoon, I told her I had an appointment. She asked what kind of appointment. I said it was personal admin. She smiled, but her eyes tightened. She did not like not knowing. She thrived on knowing. She needed knowledge to control the story. When I stayed calm and vague, she grew sharper, asking whether it was medical, whether it was work-related, whether it was about us. I told her it was about clarity. I watched her swallow and pretend she was fine. Later that week, the phone bill cycle refreshed on my account. The message count had not slowed. It had barely changed. Even after she referenced the bill in that staff corridor, even after she started selling nothing there to anyone who would listen, she was still texting Grant like oxygen. I took a screenshot of the statement line again and placed it beside the first one. The pattern was no longer a spike. It was a lifestyle. On Thursday night, Lena came home late again and claimed it was a short debrief. She said she met Grant briefly near the office. Then she corrected herself and said it was actually near the venue because they had to pick up leftover materials. She said it did not matter because it was still charity work. Then she dumped her bag on the floor and headed for the shower like she always did when she wanted the day to disappear. When she left the room, her bag sat open just enough to show what was inside. A name tag. Not hers. Grant Pike. The tag was bent slightly, as if it had been worn and pulled off quickly. It was the kind of small, dumb, physical object that destroys big, clever lies. There was no hacking, no surveillance, no miracle footage, just a labeled item sitting in my living room, like it belonged there. I did not touch it right away. I did not wave it in the air. I simply took my phone, held it steady, and photographed the name tag inside the bag with the date and time visible on my lock screen, because I wanted the world's simplest proof captured cleanly. Then I put the phone down and waited for the water to stop running, because now I had something Lena could not reframe as a misunderstanding. And I had a mediator appointment on Friday. Friday came with a clear sky and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Lena acted normal in the morning, which meant she was overperforming. She made coffee, asked about my day, and smiled too quickly, as if a fast smile could outrun a slow truth. Her phone stayed close, and her bag stayed closer, because the name tag inside it had weight now, even if she did not know I had already photographed it. I left the house with the calm posture she expected from me, because she liked me calm the way drivers like green lights. Calm meant predictable. Calm meant safe. Calm meant she could keep doing what she was doing without paying for it yet. The mediator's office was in a plain building with neutral art on the walls and chairs designed to make conflict feel manageable. The receptionist spoke in a low professional tone, the kind that treats your pain like a scheduling problem. I signed in, sat down, and watched my hands for any sign of shaking. They did not shake. I had moved past shaking. I was in the phase where everything felt simple. The mediator was named Elise Ward, and she carried herself like someone who had seen every version of betrayal and still believed in paperwork. She asked basic questions, not for drama, but for structure. She asked how long we had been married, whether we had children, and whether there were shared assets. She asked what my goals were. I told her I wanted a separation plan that did not rely on a shouting match, and I wanted to protect myself from narrative sabotage. Elise did not flinch at the phrase narrative sabotage. She nodded like it was a common hazard. She explained the difference between legal outcomes and social outcomes, and she stressed that social outcomes often decided legal tone. She advised me to keep everything documented, to stay consistent, and to avoid any behavior that could be framed as intimidation. She told me that a calm person with clear records usually wins the room, even when the other person wins the first conversation. I left with a short checklist and a simple recommendation. If I chose to file, I could do it with clean hands and a clean timeline. If I chose to confront, I should do it in a controlled environment where witnesses existed and emotion could not rewrite facts. Elise said the same thing in softer language, but I heard the real instruction underneath. If Lena wanted a stage, I should choose the stage, not react to the one she built. When I got back to my car, I sat for a minute and looked at the photos on my phone. The program page with Grant's name, the public story clip with Lena laughing beside him, the merchant alert from the hotel bar, the rideshare charge with the wrong location, the email from the charity coordinator listing committee tasks and names, the name tag inside Lena's bag. None of it was a confession. All of it was a pattern. That is what Lena never understood. You do not need a single dramatic moment when you have 10 small ones that all point the same way. I drove home and arrived earlier than she expected. The house was quiet. Lena had already left for work. I did not celebrate the quiet. I used it. I opened my folder, laid the documents out on the desk, and made a one-page table like Elise recommended. Date, time, location, claim, proof. I kept the language dry. I did not write. She betrayed me. I wrote, she claimed a debrief near the office. Rideshare location shows otherwise. I wrote, she claimed Grant was a recent project partner. Committee list shows earlier involvement. I wrote, she claimed nothing was there. Public story suggests intimacy and ongoing proximity. Then I placed the printed page in a clear sleeve and labeled it Friday, because I was done trusting memory alone. Memory can be argued with. Paper is harder. Lena came home that evening carrying the same restless energy she had carried for weeks. She kissed me, asked how my day was, and watched my face too closely while I answered. She asked where I went that afternoon, because she had asked before, and I had not fed her curiosity. I told her I had a personal admin appointment. She smiled and said that sounded responsible, then asked again what kind of admin. I told her I was sorting household planning. Her smile tightened at the edges. She did not like vague answers. She liked data she could manipulate. Then she changed the subject and asked whether I wanted to meet some friends tomorrow, because there was a casual get-together planned. Her voice was light, but the timing was not. She wanted to pull me into public normalcy. She wanted photos, witnesses, and a sense of stability she could point to later. I agreed, because public normalcy was a tool for me too. That night, she fell asleep quickly, which meant she had been emotionally exhausted all day. At 3:47 a.m., the glow still came, but it was shorter now, like she was trying to reduce exposure. I stared at the ceiling and listened to her tiny movements, the small shift of her shoulder, the quiet tap of her thumb, the brief pause that meant she was waiting for an answer. Then the glow stopped. In the morning, she acted sweeter than usual. She offered to drive us to the get-together, claimed she wanted us to arrive together, and suggested we stop by the same cafe near her office because the coffee there was excellent. I recognized the move immediately. She was building a location. She was giving Grant's world a harmless cover. She was trying to make the overlap feel inevitable. I told her we could go wherever she wanted. We arrived at the get-together around noon, held at a friend's house in a neighborhood full of tidy lawns and polite fences. The friend circle was our mutual social web, the one Lena depended on for status and insulation. People hugged Lena, complimented her dress, and asked about the charity event like it was a glamorous performance. Lena glowed under the attention. She played the role perfectly. She made jokes. She asked others about their lives. She smiled in a way that made people feel like she cared about them. Then the soft knives began. A woman named Paige, one of those friends who collects other people's secrets like jewelry, asked Lena whether Grant was the one she was always texting. She said it like a joke, a light laugh, but her eyes were sharp. Lena laughed too quickly and said it was all committee work, nothing exciting. Paige nodded and made a face like she was pretending to believe. A man named Theo, who liked me and disliked drama, asked me quietly whether everything was okay at home. He said he noticed Lena seemed stressed lately. I told him we were fine. I kept my tone calm and neutral. Theo nodded, but his concern stayed on his face because he was not stupid. Then the bigger pressure arrived in the shape of a phone held too high. Someone was scrolling social media in the kitchen and paused on a clip from the charity event. It was the same story I had already saved, but this time it was being viewed by multiple people in one room. The person laughed and said Lena and Grant looked like a power duo. Lena walked into the kitchen right as those words landed. For a split second, her face froze. Then she laughed and said, people were ridiculous. But she reached for the phone too fast. She took it as if she was just jokingly checking what the fuss was about, but she was not joking. She was trying to control the feed. She was trying to delete the moment from the room. People watched her reaction, and when people watch, the room becomes an arena whether you asked for one or not. I stayed still and let her do the work. Paige made another small comment, this time about how the committee list was public and how Grant had been involved longer than Lena had implied. Paige said she only knew because she had clicked the charity page after seeing the clip. The comment sounded casual, but it was a needle. Lena smiled and said she must have misspoken about timing, because everything had been busy. Then Paige asked a simple follow-up. If Grant had been involved longer, why did Lena mention him like he was new? Lena laughed again, but the laugh had no warmth. She said it was not important, and she tried to pivot to another topic. The pivot failed. People had smelled uncertainty, and uncertainty is the scent of gossip. They leaned in, not aggressively, but with that polite hunger people have when they sense a hidden story. Lena looked at me then, and her eyes carried a silent instruction. Save me. Reframe this. Shut it down. I did not save her. I did not attack her either. I did something worse for a person like Lena. I stayed calm and asked one neutral question in the mildest tone, the kind of tone that sounds supportive. I asked whether Grant was the number tied to our phone plan, because the bill had looked strange. The kitchen went quiet, not fully, but enough. It was not a dramatic silence. It was the silence that falls when people realize they are not watching gossip anymore. They are watching consequences form. Lena's face did not just tighten. It changed. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as her mind tried to compute how much I knew. She tried to laugh it off and said I was misunderstanding how phone plans worked. Then she said the bill was probably counting workgroup texts. Then she said the plan had always been high because of her committee coordination. 3 explanations in a row, none of them anchored to anything. Paige looked between us with an expression that pretended to be sympathy, but was actually interest. Theo's face turned flat, like he was disappointed. Lena's phone buzzed right then, because the universe has an ugly sense of timing. She glanced at it too quickly, then tried to hide the screen. But the name had already flashed, visible enough for someone standing nearby to catch it. Grant. It was not a conspiracy. It was simply a lock screen preview doing what lock screen previews do. Paige did not say anything, but her eyebrows lifted, and I saw her store the moment away like a new piece of treasure. Lena set the phone down hard on the counter and said she needed air. She pushed past me, moving too fast, shoulders rigid, as if she could outrun the room's memory. She walked outside toward the back patio. I followed at a normal pace, not as a pursuer, but as a husband who looked like he was trying to calm his wife. The trick was to make my movement seem caring. Caring was the cover that kept Lena from screaming that I was controlling. On the patio, she turned on me with a sharp expression and demanded to know why I would embarrass her like that. She spoke in a low voice, because the walls had ears, and she knew it. She asked whether I was trying to ruin her. I kept my voice calm and told her the truth in a way that did not sound like a confession or an accusation. I said I was trying to understand why our phone bill showed 7,439 texts to one number, why her stories kept changing, and why Grant's name kept appearing in places it should not. Her expression flickered. For a second, she looked afraid. Then she hardened and tried a different tactic. She said I was paranoid. She said I was obsessing. She said I was making things up because I could not handle her success. I almost smiled, because Elise had warned me about this exact pivot. When facts appear, Lena attacks the mind that collected them. It is easier to discredit a person than to discredit a timestamp. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I told her I had documents. I told her I had a timeline. I told her I had saved public posts and printed committee lists. I told her I had taken a photo of Grant's name tag inside her bag last week. That last detail hit like a slap without physical contact. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face for half a second before she recovered. She opened her mouth to deny, then stopped, because she realized denial would be too risky now. She tried to pivot again, but her words came slower. Her brain was struggling to find an exit. Inside the house, the conversation continued without us, because people do not stop talking when the main characters leave the room. They fill the gap with assumptions, and assumptions become stories, and stories become reputation. Lena's shoulders tightened as she heard laughter from inside, a laugh that was not hers. She realized she had lost control of the room. Her greatest fear was happening in real time. She was being seen. She hissed that we needed to talk at home, privately, tonight. She said it like an order, like privacy would protect her again. I told her we could talk, but only after she stopped lying. She stared at me with the kind of hatred that comes from being cornered by your own choices. Then she walked back inside with her chin lifted, forcing a smile onto her face like makeup. She rejoined the group as if nothing happened, but the room had already shifted. People's eyes followed her differently now. The trust was not broken in one dramatic crash. It was leaking out through small cracks. On the drive home, she was silent for most of the way, gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Her phone sat in the cup holder face down, like a dead animal. Twice it buzzed, and twice she ignored it. She was not ignoring Grant. She was ignoring the risk of being caught again. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me with a brittle calm and said, "We would handle this like adults." She said she had explanations. She said I needed to stop making her look bad. I nodded because adults do handle things like adults. Adults use records. And as I followed her into the house, I already knew what she was going to see next, because I had chosen the stage this time. The folder was waiting in my desk drawer, and I was done pretending it was just paperwork. Lena walked into the house like she was stepping onto a stage she had rehearsed, shoulders back, chin lifted, face set in that brittle calm people use when they plan to win by acting reasonable. She said we would handle this like adults, and the irony almost made me laugh, because adults do not delete messages at 3:47 a.m. and then complain about being misunderstood. She moved through the hallway with purposeful steps, as if momentum could turn my question into her verdict. I followed at a normal pace, not too close, not too far, because chasing makes you look guilty and lagging makes you look weak. She wanted me in either role. I refused both. I let her lead like a person who did not realize the door was already locked from the other side. She stopped in the living room and turned to face me, arms crossed, voice low and controlled, and she started the speech I could predict now, the one that always began with how hard she worked and how much pressure she was under, and how unfair it was that I had chosen a social moment to embarrass her. She framed herself as exhausted and me as unstable, because that framing had worked for her in smaller rooms. She told me I had no idea what she dealt with. Then she told me I was punishing her for being successful. Then she told me I was letting my insecurity poison the marriage. I let her finish, because watching someone stack lies is useful when you plan to label each one. When she paused, expecting me to explode or apologize, I simply asked her to sit down at the table. I said it like a request, but I made it sound like routine, because routine is the best disguise for consequence. She hesitated, eyes narrowing, then sat anyway, because she assumed she was still in control, and control makes people careless. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the clear sleeve folder. Then I placed it on the table gently, like it was a bank statement, not a marriage autopsy. Her eyes tracked the folder with a brief flicker of recognition, and she tried to hide it behind a small smile that looked like patience. She asked what that was. I told her it was my timeline. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to reduce you, and she said that was insane, because normal husbands did not build timelines. She said people who build timelines are obsessive. She said I was proving her point, that I was spiraling. I slid the first page toward her without speaking, because the best answer to a speech is paper. The page was plain, not dramatic, just dates, times, locations, and claims beside proof. The language was boring on purpose, because boring is credible. Her eyes moved across the lines faster than I expected, which told me she knew exactly what each line meant. She tried to keep her face neutral, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the sleeve. She said the phone bill was not proof of an affair. She said texting could be work. She said donors and committee members sent large volumes of messages. She said the charity was in crisis mode and her job required constant contact. I nodded once, as if I agreed in principle. Then I pointed to the line with the number and the name, because the bill did not show a committee. It showed one number. I reminded her that the number belonged to Grant, and she had never once told me she needed thousands of messages with him to do her job. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because arguing with raw counts is like arguing with gravity. She switched tactics and said I had been snooping. She said I must have violated her privacy. She said I had probably gone through her phone. The accusation was not about truth. It was about flipping the spotlight. If she could make me the offender, she could demand my apology and bury her behavior in a debate about boundaries. I told her I never touched her phone. I told her she handed me the evidence herself, in public, in daylight, through her own patterns. I reminded her the story clip was public. I reminded her the charity committee list was emailed to me by the coordinator after a simple donor question. I reminded her that her bag had contained Grant's name tag, and I had photographed it where it sat, because it was in my living room, not in a vault. At the mention of the name tag, her face changed again, and this time the change lasted longer. She stared at the table as if she could force the object to disappear by refusing to see it. Then she looked up and asked when I had taken that photo, because now she was not defending innocence, she was measuring exposure. I told her the day she left the house and forgot her bag was open. Her lips parted slightly, and she inhaled like she was about to speak. Then she swallowed the words. She was running calculations now, not emotions. She was trying to figure out who else might know, how far the story had spread, and whether her damage control needed to be quiet or aggressive. She chose aggressive. She said I was trying to ruin her reputation. She said I was turning friends against her. She said what I did at the get-together was cruel. She said people would remember that moment, and that my behavior would reflect on me too, because she could still threaten me with social punishment. Lena loved two currencies more than money. She loved status and narrative. I told her calmly that people would remember the phone buzz showing Grant's name because she handed that moment to the kitchen herself. I told her people would remember her changing explanations in real time because she could not keep her story straight. I told her that if she wanted to talk about cruelty, she could start with 7,439 texts to one number while lying in bed next to me. That line made her flinch, but she recovered fast and said I was being dramatic. She said I was inventing an affair out of numbers. She said she and Grant were close because they were teammates. She said I could not handle closeness that did not involve me. Then she did something small and revealing. She looked toward the hallway, toward the front door, as if she was thinking about leaving. Not because she was scared, but because she wanted a reset. Lena believed every conflict could be paused by walking away and returning with a new angle. I said she could leave if she wanted, but the evidence would not leave with her. She froze, then said she did not know what I meant. I slid another sleeve toward her, the printed email with headers, the committee task list, Grant's name tied to specific follow-up duties, dates that went back further than her story. I watched her eyes track it, and I saw the moment she realized her timeline was no longer a private invention. It had a paper trail outside our house. She leaned back and said this was insane. Then she said I had no right to contact the charity. Then she said I was sabotaging her work. She was angry now, but it was not righteous anger. It was panic wearing anger's clothing. I asked her a simple question, the kind that cuts through noise. I asked when she planned to stop lying. She stared at me with a hard expression and said she was not lying. She said she had made a few mistakes under stress. She said she had worded things poorly. She said none of it meant what I was implying. Then she reached for the folder. The gesture was not curiosity. It was control. She wanted to take it, to hold it, to decide what stayed on the table. I placed my hand on the folder first, not aggressively, just firmly, and her eyes flashed with something sharp. That flash told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. She did not want resolution. She wanted possession. She pulled her hand back and said I was threatening her now. I almost smiled again, because she had moved to the next step in the script. Threatening, unstable, obsessive, keeping score. She had used those words too cleanly, too quickly, like they were bullet points she had practiced. And that was when the real twist arrived. Not from a dramatic reveal, but from a pattern that clicked into place with an ugly simplicity. Lena was not improvising. Lena was reciting. I stood up, walked to the coat rack by the door, and took her bag from where she had dropped it. I did not rummage. I did not dig. I simply lifted the outer pocket flap and let gravity do what it does, because gravity is a neutral witness. A folded sheet slid out and landed on the table. It was a small printout, nothing official looking, just a page of notes, typed with short phrases and reminders. The kind of thing you carry when you plan a meeting or when you plan a conflict. At the top it said, in plain text, calm responses, and underneath it were lines like, say he is paranoid, say he is keeping score, say he is trying to ruin you, redirect to privacy, emphasize stress, mention his insecurity, mention control, ask for sympathy. Lena stared at the page like it was a dead animal. Her mouth opened and closed, and for the first time in weeks, her words did not arrive on schedule. The room went quiet in a way that felt almost holy, because silence is what happens when a liar runs out of rehearsed lines. I tapped the page lightly with one finger and asked who wrote it. She said it was nothing. Then she said it was a joke. Then she said it was a self-help thing someone sent her. Her voice sounded thinner now, like the confidence had been drained out of it. She tried to grab the page, but I slid it away without drama. And she stopped, because she realized any sudden movement would make her look guilty again. I asked who sent it. She hesitated, and that hesitation was a confession in slow motion. Then she said, Paige had been trying to help her handle stress, and Paige had suggested phrases that would keep her calm when I was being difficult. She said Paige meant well. She said it was harmless. Harmless was the word people use when they want you to ignore intent. So now I had it. Not just the affair pattern, but the narrative plan. Lena had been coached to manage me, not to fix us. She had been preparing to paint me as the problem while keeping Grant as the secret solution. She had been building an exit ramp with my name on it, and she had been laying the boards for weeks. I told her she could text Grant all she wanted, but she could not text her way out of a documented timeline. I told her she could rehearse phrases, but she could not rehearse receipts into disappearing. I told her that if she wanted to act like an adult, she would start by telling the truth, not by reading from a script. Her face tightened, then softened in a sudden shift, because she realized anger was failing. She tried tears next. Quiet ones. Controlled ones. The kind that are supposed to make you feel like a monster. She said she felt trapped. She said she felt lonely. She said I did not see her anymore. She said Grant listened. There it was, finally. The smallest piece of honesty she had offered in months, and it was not even an apology. It was an explanation meant to justify her choices. I did not comfort her. I did not mock her. I asked one more simple question. I asked whether she planned to keep seeing him. She looked at me, eyes wet, and said she did not know. Not know, not never, not I am sorry. I do not know. That answer told me everything about what she wanted. She wanted the marriage and the affair, the status and the secret, the home and the escape. She wanted to keep the benefits and outsource the guilt. I stood there and felt the last thread of doubt snap cleanly, because there is a point where evidence stops being a puzzle and becomes a door. Then her phone buzzed again, long and insistent, and she looked at it like it was a lifeline. She did not answer it, but she read it, and her face changed fast. She swallowed and said there was an emergency committee meeting tonight, a sudden compliance issue, and she had to go. She said it was urgent. She said it was about the charity's reputation. I asked what kind of meeting happened at night with no notice. She said it was an executive session. I asked where it was. She said at the charity office. I reached for my own phone, opened the shared calendar we still had linked, and refreshed because Lena had forgotten one thing in her panic. She had forgotten that she loved invites and scheduling an official-looking proof when it served her, and she had left the trail visible. The event popped up on the shared calendar with a clean title and a location. Executive Session, Compliance Review, and Grant Pike was listed as an attendee. Lena saw it on my screen, and she went perfectly still, as if her body had finally understood what her mouth refused to say. And in that stillness, I realized the next fight would not be in our kitchen. It would be in a room where minutes could be recorded, where witnesses could watch, and where her script would not save her. I did not tell Lena she could not go, because I was not her father and I was not her jailer, and she would have loved either role for me. I simply stood there with my phone in my hand, the shared calendar entry glowing like a quiet confession, and I watched her understand that the meeting was no longer just a lie she could perform in my living room. She tried to recover with speed, the way she always did when a story cracked, and she said the attendee list was automatic, because Grant was tied to compliance work, because the charity was under pressure, because everything was messy right now. She said it with that familiar rhythm, the one that sounded reasonable if you did not know it was rehearsed, but the paper from her bag had ruined the magic of her performance, and now every smooth line sounded like a cue. I told her I was not stopping her, but I was also not pretending anymore. I said she could walk out of this house and go sit in a room with Grant, but she would not come back to a home where her lies were treated like weather. I watched her face tighten as she realized I was not bargaining. She had spent weeks trying to move me into a debate about feelings, because feelings are fog and fog covers footprints, but I was keeping everything on the ground where timestamps lived. She left anyway. She did not slam the door because she still wanted plausible innocence for anyone who might ask later. She picked up her keys quietly, kept her shoulders controlled, and walked out with the posture of someone on her way to work, not someone on her way to a secret. I waited 10 seconds after her car pulled away. Then I did what I had been doing since the phone bill arrived. I documented. I took a photo of the shared calendar entry, including the time and the location. I took a photo of the attendee list showing Grant's name. I wrote the time on paper, signed it, and placed it in the sleeve. I added one line to my table in the folder, calm and dry, because calm and dry keeps you out of trouble when someone later claims you are emotional and unstable. Then I did the next adult thing, the thing Lena would later call betrayal, because it did not benefit her. I reported the conflict to the charity. Not with drama, not with insults, not with accusations that could be dismissed as jealousy, but with a simple request for process. I used the general compliance email on the charity website, the same one any donor could use, and I wrote a short message stating that I had evidence suggesting a personal relationship between two key committee members, that the relationship involved repeated private meetings and public social posts, and that the relationship might create a conflict of interest during compliance discussions. I asked for the appropriate channel to submit documentation for review. I did not write, "My wife is cheating on me," because nobody cares about a marriage in a conference room. I wrote, "There may be a policy risk and reputational exposure, because people who control narratives respond to risk, not romance." I attached only one harmless item at first, a screenshot of the public story clip with the date stamp visible, because it was public and could not be framed as snooping. I told them I had additional documentation if needed. I ended politely and signed my name like a man with nothing to hide. An hour later, I got a reply. The sender was Celeste Monroe, the charity's executive director, the kind of person who could smile through a scandal and make it sound like a fundraising opportunity. Her email was careful and warm in tone, but it carried steel underneath. She thanked me for caring about the organization. She said they took all compliance concerns seriously. She asked me to forward any relevant documentation to her and the board secretary, so it could be reviewed in an executive session. Board secretary. That phrase landed in my mind with a cold clarity, because board secretary meant minutes, and minutes meant records, and records meant Lena could not charm her way out of this with tears and script lines. I forwarded the evidence, but I did it the way Elise had advised, in a clean order, with context lines and no emotional commentary. I included the phone bill page showing 7,439 texts to one number. I included the screenshot of the shared calendar executive session listing Grant as an attendee. I included the merchant alert from the hotel bar because it hit my account and showed a date. I included the photo of Grant's name tag inside Lena's bag because it was a labeled item in my home, not a private message stolen from a device. I included the committee list email from the coordinator showing Grant's role. I ended with a single sentence offering to answer any process questions and to provide originals upon request. Then I printed my sent email chain and filed it too, because I had learned that sending something is not the same as proving you sent it later, not when narrative people start rewriting. The reply that followed was short and sharp. Celeste said the board would address the concern tonight and asked me to come to the office lobby at a specific time to speak briefly with a compliance facilitator before the session. She used the word facilitator, not investigator, and that mattered. Facilitator meant the goal was not criminal punishment. It meant the goal was a decision, a documented one, and documented decisions are how social scaffolding collapses. I sat in my kitchen and stared at the time she listed, and I felt something inside me go very calm. This was the stage Elise meant, not a bedroom argument, not a late-night shouting match, a room where policies existed, where minutes could be written, and where Lena's rehearsed phrases would sound childish next to a printed ledger. I got ready the same way I got ready for work, because if you treat a moment like war, you start acting like a soldier, and soldiers get blamed for damage even when they did not start the fire. I wore a plain jacket, brought my folder, and printed one extra page that summarized the timeline in a simple table. I did not bring a speech. I did not bring rage. I brought the smallest possible set of truths that still formed a cage. At the charity office lobby, the lighting was bright and sterile, and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive donated flowers. I arrived early and sat in a chair that faced the elevator, because facing the elevator meant I could watch who arrived and when. Celeste walked through the lobby with purposeful grace, phone in hand, posture perfect, expression neutral, as if nothing unusual was happening. She did not greet me like a villain, because villains create scenes. She greeted me like a donor with a concern, because that framing kept her safe no matter what happened next. The compliance facilitator introduced herself as Morgan Hale, and she had the kind of steady voice that made people feel foolish for yelling. She asked me to confirm that the documents were accurate. She asked whether I had altered anything. She asked whether I understood that the board could not mediate my marriage, but could address policy risks. I told her yes to all of it, because yes is the cleanest word when the truth is on your side. Morgan asked one more question, the kind that sounds harmless, but is actually a trap for exaggeration. She asked whether I had any direct proof of physical intimacy. I told her I did not, and I did not need it. I said the risk was the volume of private contact, the repeated secret meetings, the public social proximity, and the use of shared household money in places connected to those meetings. I said the pattern created a conflict that could compromise compliance discussions and damage donor trust if it became public. I watched her nod, because she understood what Lena never did. In institutions, proof of risk moves faster than proof of love. The elevator doors opened then, and Lena stepped out with Grant beside her. Grant Pike looked like a man who had practiced being charming under pressure. He wore a neat blazer, carried a laptop bag, and walked with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to him. Lena's face was composed, but her eyes flicked toward me in a quick flash of alarm, then locked down again. Grant's gaze followed hers, and I saw his expression change when he realized who I was. He recovered quickly, smiling in a polite way, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He did not want to meet me here. He wanted me at home, alone, emotional, easy to label. Lena approached Celeste and Morgan with a bright professional tone, and she acted like I was not there until she could no longer avoid it. Morgan introduced us in a neutral way, and I kept my posture calm, because calm is a weapon that leaves no bruises. Lena tried to speak first. She began with a controlled explanation about donor concerns and misinterpretation, and she used the same phrases I had seen on her script page, just softened to fit a workplace. She said I was stressed. She said I was reading into things. She said I had been worried lately. Morgan stopped her politely and said the board would hear facts, not feelings, and any personal commentary should be saved for later. Lena's eyes flashed, because being cut off by process is the worst thing that can happen to a person who lives by narrative. Grant tried to step in next, offering a smooth explanation about committee workload and high-volume coordination, but Morgan asked him a simple operational question. She asked why he needed private late-night messaging with Lena on a scale reflected in the phone record, and why an executive session that was supposed to reduce reputational risk included the same person whose relationship created that risk. Grant's smile faltered at the edges just briefly, but it was enough. Celeste said they would go upstairs now, and the board secretary would log that evidence had been received and would be reviewed. She said it in a tone that sounded calm, but it was a warning. Evidence received meant the story was now bigger than Lena's control. As they moved toward the elevator, Lena turned slightly and looked at me with a tight expression, and she said, in a low voice meant only for me, that I was destroying her life. I did not answer, because answers create noise, and noise is what liars use to slip away. I watched the elevator doors close, and I realized something else in that moment, something colder than the affair itself. Lena had not looked surprised that Grant was there. She had looked surprised that I was there, which meant she expected a meeting. She expected a process. She just expected it to happen without my presence. And that meant someone inside that building had been feeding her information. Someone who knew the board schedule. Someone who knew when executive sessions were called. Someone who could coach her with phrases and timing and control. My mind went back to Paige and the script page in Lena's bag, and a new thought formed with sharp edges. Paige was not just a friend who liked gossip. Paige was a friend who liked leverage, and leverage needs access. Morgan asked me to wait in the lobby in case the board requested clarification. I sat again, folder on my lap, and I stared at the elevator like it was a countdown clock. 20 minutes passed. 30. Then Celeste came down alone, and her expression was no longer smooth. She approached me with a careful professional face and said the board had voted to suspend Lena from committee duties pending review, and Grant's access badge for the building was being revoked under policy until the review concluded. She said it would be documented in the minutes and communicated to relevant stakeholders. She said it would be handled quietly to reduce reputational damage. Quietly. That was the word she used, and I understood the implication immediately. Quietly meant Lena still had a chance to spin this socially. Quietly meant she could claim a misunderstanding, a temporary pause, a donor overreaction, anything that kept her status intact. Celeste said one more thing, and this was where the floor shifted under my feet. She said the board secretary had flagged a second concern when reviewing my attachments, because one document had been forwarded internally before my email arrived, and the timestamp indicated someone else had shared my evidence without my permission. I asked who. Celeste said the board secretary's name was Paige Harlow. Paige. The same Paige who had been in my kitchen last weekend, smiling like she was collecting secrets. The same Paige who had coached Lena with scripted phrases, and the same Paige who apparently had her hands on the minutes and the flow of information. Celeste said the board would address that breach as well, and she said it with an edge that told me Paige had finally crossed the wrong person. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I looked down, I saw a new notification from my account, a merchant alert, not from a hotel this time, but from a print shop near the charity office. The charge description included a short line, and my throat went tight as I read it. Emergency copies, 50 sets. Someone was printing something in bulk, right now, right here, and I suddenly understood that the board session upstairs was not the only meeting happening in that building tonight. Celeste's face stayed professional, but her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, like she could already hear the damage moving through the building. I held up my phone and showed her the merchant alert again, because numbers do not care about anyone's career plans. The print shop charge sat there in plain text, and the timing matched the elevator ride that took Lena and Grant upstairs. Celeste swallowed once and asked if the card was mine. I told her it was my account, and my name was on the alert. Morgan stepped closer, read the screen, and her expression tightened in a way that told me this was no longer a marital problem. This was now an institutional problem because someone had just used my money to print something in bulk during a compliance review. Celeste asked the receptionist to call building security, and she did it without looking at me, like she was afraid eye contact would make this personal. Morgan asked me if I was willing to come upstairs briefly, because the board might need clarification. I told her I would, because I had not come this far to let the ending be edited by someone else. We took the elevator up in silence, the kind of silence that happens when adults realize there are consequences and no one can fake their way past them. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled like toner and coffee, and I immediately saw 2 cardboard boxes near the conference room door. Each box had a bright printed label on the side from the print shop. It looked like a delivery, but the boxes were already inside, which meant someone had arranged access. A woman I recognized from the committee list, a junior staffer, stood near the boxes with a clipboard and a worried face. Celeste asked her who brought them up. The staffer said Paige told her to bring them because the board needed context packets for the executive session. Context packets. That phrase almost made me laugh because it was the cleanest lie in the world. Morgan asked to see one packet before the meeting resumed. The staffer cut the tape with a key and lifted the top flap. Celeste reached in and pulled out a stapled bundle. The cover page had a bold title and a neat layout, like someone trying to make a story look official. The first line was worse than the title because it was framed like a warning. It claimed I was harassing Lena. It claimed I was tracking her movements. It claimed I was unstable and obsessive. It claimed my evidence was fabricated and my goal was retaliation. Lena and Grant were trying to build an escape route in real time, and Paige was paving it with printer ink. Celeste's hand trembled slightly as she flipped to the next pages. There were screenshots of partial information, cropped in ways that removed context, and the tone was designed to make any reader lean away from me before they even saw my file. The worst page was the last one, because it was not a screenshot at all. It was a short script, bullet points, the same style I had found in Lena's bag, and it told people what to say if I asked questions. Morgan exhaled slowly and said this would stop immediately. Celeste turned and pushed open the conference room door without knocking. Inside, the board was seated, and Lena was on one side of the table with her hands folded, face composed, eyes shining with controlled panic. Grant sat near her, posture forward, like he was already preparing to speak. Paige sat at the far end, laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard, the posture of a person who believed she owned the minutes and therefore owned reality. Paige looked up and smiled like she was hosting. Celeste stepped into the room and said the meeting was paused and that the packets placed outside were unauthorized. She held up the bundle like it was contaminated. She said a donor's payment method had been used to produce them, and that the content contained claims unrelated to compliance risk, and that the board needed to address the breach immediately. Paige's smile stayed in place for half a second, then tightened. She tried to speak, but Morgan spoke first, and Morgan's tone cut through the room like a blade that never needed sharpening. Morgan said this session was now about process integrity, conflict of interest, and misuse of access. She said the minutes would reflect exactly what happened next. She said Paige would not be recording those minutes. Paige's eyes widened, and she looked at the board chair as if the chair would save her. The chair, an older man named Franklin Dyer, did not look at her with sympathy. He looked at her like a liability. Grant leaned forward and tried to frame this as a misunderstanding, but Morgan asked him a simple question about the print shop charge. Morgan asked whether he authorized it, whether he paid for it, or whether he directed Paige to do it. Grant hesitated, and that hesitation was the only answer the room needed. Lena spoke then, voice strained but controlled, and she said she had no idea what Paige had done, and she said she never asked for packets, and she said she was being blindsided too. Her words sounded like distance, not accountability. I did not argue with her. I did not interrupt. I simply opened my folder and placed one clear sleeve on the table, not in front of Lena, but in front of Franklin. I kept my hands steady and my voice calm because I knew the packets were designed to provoke me into looking like the monster they described. I told the board I was not here to litigate my marriage, but I was here to explain why my documentation existed. I told them my wife was tied to Grant by 7,439 texts to one number on a bill that arrived at our home. I told them the relationship had overlapping meetings and public proximity, and I told them the charity's reputation was at risk if donors saw it as hidden favoritism or misconduct. I told them I submitted evidence through the proper channel, and someone inside the organization had circulated it early, then printed a counter-narrative using my funds. Franklin looked at Celeste and asked if the donor account misuse was verified. Celeste said yes, and she said the print shop label and timing matched, and she said the content was not approved by leadership. Morgan asked the staffer outside to bring in the boxes, and the staffer returned carrying one bundle like it was radioactive. Morgan asked Paige one direct question, and she asked it the way people do when they are done listening to spin. Morgan asked why Paige believed she could use her role to distribute defamatory material during an integrity review. Paige's mouth opened and she tried to speak, but her words came out tangled. She claimed she was protecting the organization. She claimed I was a risk. She claimed Lena was stressed and needed support. She claimed she had only prepared talking points, so the board would not be manipulated by emotion. Morgan asked Paige whether she had taken payment details from internal records or from Lena directly. Paige turned slightly toward Lena, like she expected help. Lena did not help her. Lena stared at Paige with a blank expression, the kind of expression that says, "I will not go down with you." That was the late truth, the one that made my stomach tighten even more than the affair. Paige had not been coaching Lena as a friend. Paige had been coaching Lena as a gatekeeper, a person who could protect the story if she controlled the minutes, the packets, and the board's first impression. And Lena had accepted the protection because it let her keep Grant close while keeping her image clean. Franklin said the board would vote immediately on 3 actions: revoking Grant's access pending review, suspending Lena from committee duties pending review, and removing Paige from the secretary role effective now. Celeste nodded once, because she had already decided, and her nod told the room where the power truly sat. The vote happened fast, hands lifting, names recorded by a different staffer who typed the minutes as Morgan watched. Paige tried to protest, but Morgan cut her off and instructed security to escort her out of the room. The security guard did it calmly, without force, because the humiliation did not require drama. Paige stood, face flushed, and walked out past the boxes of her own printed lies. Grant's badge was collected at the door, and he tried to argue, but security did not argue back. They simply followed policy. Lena stayed seated, eyes glassy, breathing shallow, because she had run out of scripts and the room was no longer hers. Franklin looked at me and asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted one thing entered into the minutes, because minutes were what Lena feared more than anger. I told him I wanted it recorded that I never accessed Lena's private devices, never used surveillance, and never asked for favors, and that every piece of evidence was public, household level, or tied to my own account. Franklin nodded and instructed the staffer to type it in, line by line, while everyone watched. Lena's eyes flicked to the projected minutes on the screen and then back to me, and she finally looked the way she should have looked weeks ago. Not offended, not smug, not superior, just caught. And when the staffer finished typing the final line, Morgan read it back to the room, then looked at Lena and asked her to confirm one date from the calendar entry. Lena stared at the table for a long moment, then whispered that she could not. In that silence, the story ended the only way it ever could, with one small truth spoken on record and a room full of witnesses who no longer needed my anger to believe me.